Ethan Carter lived alone in a small house at the edge of a quiet town. The nights were peaceful, the kind where the only sounds were the whisper of the wind and the distant hoot of an owl. It had been 5 years since his wife, Sarah, had passed away. 5 years of silence. 5 years of loneliness. Tonight, the sky was different. Heavy clouds gathered above his house, covering the stars. The air smelled of rain, but no drops had fallen yet. Ethan sat on his couch, sipping a cup of coffee, his eyes lost in old memories. The framed picture of Sarah sat on the table beside him. He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Then it happened. A bright blue flash lit up the sky. The ground trembled for a brief moment. And then, darkness. The lights in Ethan's house flickered once and died. His coffee machine clicked off. The hum of his refrigerator stopped. A power cut. Ethan muttered, standing up, but something felt strange. He walked to the window and looked outside. The streetlights were still on. The neighbors' houses still had power. Only his home had gone dark. His heart pounded. He wasn't the kind of man who got scared easily, but something about this didn't feel normal. Slowly, he reached for the flashlight in the drawer and stepped toward the door. That was when he heard it. A soft knock. Ethan froze. He hadn't heard a car outside. No footsteps on the gravel. Just the knock, light and uncertain, as if whoever stood outside wasn't sure if they should be there. His mind raced. A lost traveler. A stranger in need of help. A trick. Taking a deep breath, he unlocked the door and pulled it open. His breath caught in his throat. A woman stood there, but she was unlike anyone he had ever seen. She was tall, her skin a pale silver that shimmered under the porch light. Her hair was long, flowing like liquid metal. Her eyes, large and glowing blue, held an emotion he couldn't understand. She wore a dark cloak, but he could see strange armor underneath, scratched and worn as if she had been through a battle. Ethan tightened his grip on the doorframe. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the confusion rushing through his mind. The woman took a step forward. For a moment, it seemed like she might fall. Her hand shot out, grabbing the doorframe for support. That was when Ethan saw the deep cut on her arm, a dark blue liquid oozing from the wound. She was hurt. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost musical, but filled with pain. Ethan Carter. Hearing his name from her lips sent a chill down his spine. He had never seen this woman before. How did she know him? "I need to talk," she continued, breathing heavily. "I need to remind you." "Remind me of what?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman lifted her other hand, and for the first time, Ethan saw what she was holding. A silver pendant. His chest tightened. He knew that pendant. He had seen it every day for years. It was Sarah's. His wife's locket. The one she always wore. The one that had disappeared the night she died. Ethan's world swayed for a moment. His breath quickened. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. The woman's glowing blue eyes stared into his. "Sarah," she whispered. "She is alive." Ethan felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. His mind screamed that it wasn't possible. That this woman, whoever she was lying. But deep inside, something told him she wasn't. The wind howled around them as the first raindrops began to fall. Ethan Carter's quiet life had just ended, and nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan Carter stood frozen in the doorway. The rain was falling harder now, tapping against the wooden porch like tiny fingers. The strange woman before him shivered slightly, but her glowing blue eyes never left his. She had spoken Sarah's name. She had Sarah's pendant. Ethan's mind raced. Sarah is alive. That was impossible. Sarah had died 5 years ago. He had buried her. He had mourned her. And yet, this woman stood before him, saying something that made his entire world shake. "Come inside," Ethan finally said. His voice was firm, but his hands were shaking. He didn't know who she was, but one thing was clear. She was injured, and she needed help. The woman gave a slow nod and stepped inside. Ethan shut the door behind her and quickly grabbed a towel from the nearby chair. "You're soaked," he said, handing it to her. "Sit down." She took the towel and sat on the couch, her movements careful, as if she was not used to being in such a small, simple place. Ethan switched on a battery-powered lamp, casting a soft glow in the room. Now that she was sitting closer, he could see her more clearly. Her silver skin had a faint shimmer, as if reflecting the light. The deep cut on her arm was still bleeding that strange dark blue liquid. Ethan walked to the kitchen, grabbed the first aid kit, and returned. He sat across from her, opening the kit. "Let me help with that wound." The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. Ethan carefully cleaned the wound, his fingers brushing against her cool skin. The texture was smooth, almost like polished metal, yet she was clearly made of flesh. As he wrapped the bandage around her arm, he asked the question burning in his mind. "Who are you?" The woman took a deep breath. "My name is Althera. I come from a world far beyond your stars." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "An alien?" Althera nodded. "Yes." And so was Sarah. Ethan froze. His hands clenched around the bandages. "That's not possible. Sarah was human. I met her here on Earth. We lived together. She wasn't." He shook his head. She wasn't an alien. Althera's glowing blue eyes softened. She was hiding. She had to. Ethan stood up, running a hand through his hair. His heart pounded. "No, I don't believe you. Sarah wasn't some creature from another world." Althera remained calm. "She wasn't a creature, Ethan. She was one of us. A Silari." She reached into her cloak and pulled out the silver pendant once more. "You gave her this, didn't you?" Ethan stared at it. The pendant was simple, but inside was a small picture of him and Sarah, taken on their wedding day. His hand shook as he took it from her. "She never took it off," he whispered. "She couldn't," Althera said. "It was a promise. A bond. Something far stronger than you understand." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Then tell me. Make me understand." Althera took a slow breath. "Sarah was sent to Earth to escape the war on our homeworld. The Silari High Council wanted her to marry someone of noble blood, but she refused. She didn't believe in their rules. She wanted freedom." Ethan's chest tightened. "So she came here." "Yes," Althera said. "And then she met you. She fell in love with you. Something our people did not expect." Ethan sat back down, his mind spinning. "If this is true, why didn't she tell me?" "Because if she had," Althera said softly, "they would have taken her away sooner." Ethan swallowed hard. "Then what happened the night she died?" Althera's expression darkened. "She didn't die, Ethan. The Silari found her. They took her back to our homeworld." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. No, I saw her. He stopped. He had seen the accident, the fire, the wreckage. But what if? Althera leaned forward. "It was staged. The council made sure you believed she was gone. They didn't want you searching for her. They feared what you meant to her, what your love could prove." Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs. "And why are you telling me this now?" Althera's eyes glowed brighter. "Because she is still alive, and she needs you." Silence filled the room. The rain outside had slowed, but Ethan could still hear it dripping from the roof. His whole life, his whole reality, was shifting before his eyes. "Where is she?" he finally asked. "In a prison on our homeworld," Althera said. "But she has one chance to be freed." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What kind of chance?" Althera took a deep breath. You must come with me and stand before the Silari High Council. You must prove to them that love, true love, is stronger than their laws. That your bond with Sarah is unbreakable." Ethan clenched his fists. He had spent 5 years grieving. 5 years believing Sarah was gone. But now Now he had a chance to get her back. He looked into Althera's glowing blue eyes. "Then take me to her." A small smile touched Althera's lips. "Prepare yourself, Ethan Carter. You are about to leave everything you know behind." Ethan took one last glance at Sarah's picture on the table. For her, he would go to the ends of the universe. Ethan Carter had always believed that his life would end on Earth. He never thought he would leave his small house, his quiet town, or the memories of Sarah that lingered in every corner. But now, everything had changed. Sarah was alive. The words echoed in his mind as he packed a small bag, his hand shaking slightly. Althera stood by the door, watching him with calm, glowing blue eyes. She had given him little time to think. Either he left with her now, or Sarah's fate would be sealed forever. Ethan zipped up the bag and looked around his house one last time. The walls held pictures of a life that had once been full of love, laughter, and warmth. But none of it mattered if Sarah was out there, waiting for him. He turned to Althera. "Let's go." Althera nodded and led him outside. The night air was cool, and the ground was still wet from the rain. There was no spaceship, no flashing lights, only the quiet hum of the wind. Ethan frowned. "How are we leaving?" Althera raised her hand. A small device on her wrist glowed, and suddenly, the air in front of them shimmered. A dark, sleek ship appeared, its surface smooth like liquid metal. It had been cloaked, hidden from human eyes. Ethan let out a breath. Of course, alien technology. Althera gestured toward the ship's entrance. "We must hurry." Ethan stepped inside, his heart pounding. The ship's interior was sleek and futuristic, with smooth walls that pulsed with soft blue light. Althera pressed a few buttons on a floating panel, and the ship rumbled to life. As the door sealed shut, Ethan felt a strange pressure in his chest. His stomach twisted, his body growing light. He stumbled slightly. "What's happening?" he asked. "We are leaving Earth's atmosphere," Althera said, adjusting controls. "Your body is adjusting to the shift in gravity." Ethan took a deep breath and looked out a nearby window. His eyes widened. The blue and green planet he had called home was shrinking fast, disappearing into the endless blackness of space. For the first time, he truly understood. He was leaving everything behind. He turned back to Althera. "Tell me everything. No more secrets." Althera hesitated, then nodded. The Silari are one of the oldest civilizations in this galaxy. For thousands of years, our leaders have controlled our people with strict laws. Love, as you understand it, is not permitted. Marriages are arranged for political reasons. Emotions are seen as weaknesses. Ethan frowned. And Sarah, where did she fit into all of this? "She was different," Althera said. "She believed in freedom. She didn't want to be controlled. When she refused the marriage the council had chosen for her, she became a danger to their system. That's why she fled to Earth." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And then she met me." "Yes," Althera said, "and she fell in love with you, something our people had never seen before. A Silari choosing a human, it terrified the council." Ethan clenched his fists. "So they took her." Althera's expression darkened. "Yes, they wanted to erase her past, make her one of them again, but she refused. For 5 years, she has been locked away, waiting for a chance to be free." Ethan exhaled sharply. "And that's why you came to me." Althera nodded. "You are the only one who can save her. The council fears what you represent. If you can prove that human love is stronger than their laws, they will have no choice but to let her go." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "And if I fail?" Althera looked away. "Then Sarah will be exiled forever. She will never be allowed to leave, and you will never see her again." Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. He had already lost Sarah once. He wouldn't lose her again. He met Althera's gaze. "I won't fail." Althera studied him for a moment, then gave a small smile. "I believe you." The ship's lights flickered, and a soft beeping sound echoed through the cabin. "We're approaching the Silari homeworld," Althera said. Ethan turned toward the window. A massive planet came into view, its surface covered in towering silver cities and glowing blue rivers. Strange, sleek ships moved through the sky, their engines humming like whispers in the wind. Ethan's chest tightened. He had no weapons, no plan. He was stepping into the heart of an alien empire with nothing but his love for Sarah. But he wasn't afraid. He had made a vow once, to love Sarah in this life and the next. And no force in the universe was going to stop him now. Ethan Carter stood at the ship's window, staring at the massive alien planet below. The Silari homeworld was unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering silver cities stretched toward the sky, and glowing blue rivers flowed like veins of light through the dark surface. Strange, sleek ships moved in perfect formation, and giant structures floated in the sky, held up by invisible energy fields. His heart pounded. He was about to step onto an alien world, alone, with no weapons and no plan, except to get Sarah back. Althera pressed a few buttons on the ship's console. "We're entering the capital city. The council already knows we are here." Ethan turned to her. "And that's a good thing." Althera's glowing blue eyes remained calm. "It means they will not attack us. Not yet." Ethan exhaled sharply. He didn't like the sound of that. The ship began its descent, and the view changed. They flew over massive white towers shaped like spirals, and glowing bridges connected different parts of the city. The streets below were filled with tall, silver-skinned beings. Silari, just like Althera. Some wore flowing robes, while others wore dark, armored suits, their movements precise and controlled. The ship landed smoothly on a floating platform outside a massive circular building. Its walls pulsed with blue energy, and at the center was a large, glowing emblem, the mark of the Silari High Council. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. This was it. This was where Sarah was being held. Althera turned to him. "Stay close to me. Do not speak unless you are spoken to. The council does not like outsiders." Ethan gave a dry chuckle. "Yeah, I figured that out when they kidnapped my wife." Althera didn't argue. She simply pressed a button, and the ship's door slid open. Ethan stepped outside and felt a strange shift in the air, lighter than Earth's atmosphere, but filled with an energy that made his skin tingle. He forced himself to stay calm as he followed Althera down the sleek metal ramp. A group of Silari stood waiting for them. At the front was a tall figure dressed in silver robes, his eyes glowing with a deep, piercing blue. His expression was unreadable, but his presence carried a weight that made even Althera stiffen slightly. "Althera." The figure spoke, his voice smooth yet commanding. "You have returned." Althera bowed her head slightly. "High Chancellor Varric." Varric's glowing eyes shifted to Ethan. His gaze was cold, analyzing. And this must be the human. Ethan met his stare. Ethan Carter. Varric's lips curled slightly. The human, standing before the High Council. Such a thing has never happened before. Ethan crossed his arms. "Well, I never expected to stand in front of a bunch of aliens who stole my wife, so I guess we're both surprised." A murmur ran through the other Silari standing nearby. Althera shot him a warning glance, but Ethan didn't care. He wasn't here to be polite. Varric studied him for a moment before turning. "Follow me." Ethan and Althera walked behind him, their footsteps echoing on the smooth floor as they entered the grand building. The inside was just as impressive as the outside. Tall pillars stretched high above, glowing symbols floated in the air, and everything hummed with quiet energy. At the center of the massive hall stood a transparent sphere, hovering just above the ground. Inside, a figure sat on her knees, her hands bound by shimmering blue cuffs. Her long dark hair flowed around her, and even through the glass, Ethan could see the sadness in her familiar green eyes. His breath caught in his throat. "Sarah." She lifted her head slowly, her eyes widening in shock. "Ethan." Ethan rushed forward, but two armored guards stepped in his way. their weapons glowing with energy. He stopped, his fists clenched, his heart pounding in his chest. Sarah's voice shook. "Ethan, how are you here?" Varric stepped forward. "He came because of you." His voice was calm, almost amused. "And now we shall see if his love is as strong as you claimed." Ethan's hands trembled with rage. "Let her go." Varric turned to him. "You do not command here, human." He walked slowly around the sphere, his glowing eyes locked on Ethan. "Sarah violated our laws. She abandoned her duty. She chose to live among your kind, to embrace your primitive emotions. The council has already decided her fate." Ethan's heart pounded. "Then why am I here?" Varric's gaze sharpened. "Because she begged for you. She claimed that your love was greater than anything we could understand. She challenged the foundation of our laws." His voice grew softer, almost mocking. "And we are curious to see if she was right." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" Varric raised a hand, and the room darkened. A deep hum filled the air as the glowing symbols around them flickered. "You will face the trials of truth. You will prove that your bond with Sarah is stronger than any force in the universe." Ethan frowned. "And if I fail?" Varric's expression turned cold. "Then she will remain a prisoner for the rest of her days. And you will never leave this planet." Ethan met Sarah's gaze through the glass. Her eyes shimmered with fear, but also with hope. He took a deep breath, his hand steady. "I'll win," he said. "I'll prove it. And I'll bring Sarah home." A small broken smile touched Sarah's lips. Varric turned to the council. "Then let the trials begin." The hall filled with murmurs as Ethan stood tall, ready to fight for the woman he loved. He had come this far. He wasn't going to lose her now. Ethan Carter stood in the center of a massive circular chamber. The walls shimmered with strange glowing symbols, shifting and pulsing like a living thing. At the far end, Sarah remained trapped inside the transparent sphere, her green eyes locked onto him, filled with fear and hope. High Chancellor Varric stood on an elevated platform, surrounded by the members of the Silari High Council. Their silver robes moved without wind, and their glowing blue eyes watched him like he was nothing more than an insect under a magnifying glass. "The trials of truth will determine if your bond with Sarah is as powerful as she claims," Varric announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "If you fail, she remains imprisoned forever, and you will never return to your world." Ethan clenched his fists. He had come too far to back down now. "I'm ready." A low hum filled the room as the glowing symbols around him twisted and reshaped. The floor beneath his feet shifted, and suddenly the chamber changed. The audience disappeared. The council, the guards, even Sarah, gone. Ethan found himself standing in the middle of an endless desert, the air thick and heavy. A voice echoed around him. The first trial. The trial of memory. Before Ethan could react, a figure appeared in front of him. His breath caught in his throat. It was Sarah, but not the Sarah in the sphere. This was the Sarah he had known on Earth, wearing a simple summer dress, her eyes bright with laughter. She smiled at him, just like she used to. Ethan took a step forward. "Sarah." She tilted her head. "Did you ever really know me, Ethan?" Ethan froze. Something was wrong. Sarah's image flickered. Then suddenly, another version of her appeared beside the first. Then another, and another. Within moments, he was surrounded by dozens of Sarahs, all smiling, all staring at him. "Which one is the real Sarah?" the voice asked. Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his chest. He looked around, trying to think. Every Sarah looked the same, sounded the same. But he knew, only one of them was real. He closed his eyes, blocking out the images. He didn't need to see her. He just needed to feel her. Memories flooded his mind. The way Sarah would tuck her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way she always whispered his name when she was half asleep. The way she squeezed his hand 3 times whenever she wanted to say, "I love you," in a crowded place. Ethan opened his eyes and walked forward. He stopped in front of one Sarah, the one standing slightly apart from the rest. She looked at him, confused. "How do you know it's me?" Ethan took her hand and squeezed it 3 times. Her eyes filled with tears. "Ethan." The other figures vanished, leaving only the real Sarah. Then, just as suddenly as the trial had started, the desert disappeared. Ethan found himself back in the chamber, his heart still racing. The council murmured among themselves. Varric nodded slowly. He passed the first trial. Sarah let out a breath of relief, but Ethan barely had time to recover before the floor shifted again. The chamber darkened, and Ethan was surrounded by swirling shadows. The deep, cold fear crept into his chest. The second trial. The trial of sacrifice. A bright light appeared in front of him, and when it faded, Ethan saw Earth. His home. He saw his house, the small town he had lived in. The quiet streets, the old oak tree where he and Sarah used to sit for hours. Everything was perfect, untouched. And then a voice whispered in his mind, "Return now, and you can have your old life back. No more fighting. No more pain. Go home, and you will forget all of this." Ethan swallowed hard. It would be so easy to say yes, to walk away from the danger, to forget about aliens, councils, and impossible trials. But if he left, Sarah would be lost forever. His hands trembled. He missed Earth. He missed the life he had before. But he had made a vow to love Sarah, no matter what. Ethan squared his shoulders. "No, I'm not leaving without her." The image of Earth flickered and shattered like glass. The shadows around him vanished, and he was back in the chamber. Varric's expression was unreadable. He has passed the second trial. Sarah's eyes shone with pride. But before Ethan could catch his breath, Varric raised his hand. The room darkened once more. The third and final trial. The trial of strength. A deep growl rumbled through the chamber. Ethan turned and saw a massive creature standing before him. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering, with dark, metallic skin, glowing red eyes, and razor-sharp claws. Ethan's heart pounded. He had no weapons, no armor, just his fists. The creature lunged. Ethan barely dodged, rolling to the side as the ground cracked beneath its claws. He had no choice. He had to fight. He ducked under another attack, then swung his fist into the creature's side. It barely flinched. Ethan gritted his teeth. He wasn't the strongest man, but he had something the creature didn't. He had something to fight for. He grabbed a broken piece of the chamber floor, a sharp, jagged shard of metal, and just as the creature lunged again, he drove it straight into its glowing red eye. The beast roared, thrashing wildly before collapsing. Silence filled the chamber. Then a voice spoke. "The trials are complete." Ethan turned to Varric, breathing hard. "I won. Now let Sarah go." For the first time, Varric looked almost impressed. He nodded. "Very well." The sphere around Sarah vanished, and she stumbled forward. Ethan caught her in his arms, holding her tight. She buried her face in his chest. "I knew you'd come for me." Ethan pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Always." The council members murmured in surprise. Varric raised a hand, silencing them. "You have proven that human love is not a weakness," he said. "Sarah is free." Ethan tightened his hold on her. He had won. But something told him this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Ethan held Sarah tightly, his heart still pounding from the trials. He had done it. He had proven his love, his strength, and his determination. And now Sarah was free. But they were not safe yet. High Chancellor Varric studied them both with an unreadable expression. The rest of the Silari High Council whispered among themselves, clearly unsettled by what had just happened. Finally, Varric raised a hand, and the room fell silent. "You have passed the trials, human. Sarah is free to leave with you." Ethan exhaled in relief, but he wasn't stupid. He could feel the tension in the room. The Silari were not used to being challenged, and some of them clearly didn't like the outcome. Althera stepped forward. "High Chancellor, we must ensure their safe passage off the planet." One of the council members, an older Silari with piercing white eyes, scoffed. "You expect us to allow a human to leave after witnessing our sacred trials?" His gaze turned sharp. He should never have been here in the first place. Sarah gripped Ethan's hand. "We won fairly," she said firmly. "You can't go back on your word." Varric's glowing blue eyes locked onto Sarah. "I gave my word, and I will keep it." His voice was calm but carried a warning. "However, not all among us agree with this decision." Ethan clenched his fists. "So what does that mean?" Before Varric could answer, a loud alarm blared through the chamber. The walls pulsed with red light, and a deep mechanical voice echoed through the air. "Security breach detected. Unauthorized forces approaching." Ethan spun around. "What now?" Althera's expression darkened. "Someone doesn't want you to leave this planet." Varric's gaze sharpened. "Guards, escort them to their ship immediately." The armored Silari guards moved into position, but before they could act, the massive doors of the chamber burst open. A group of rogue Silari warriors stormed in, their weapons glowing with deadly blue energy. One of them, a tall warrior with dark metallic armor, pointed at Ethan and Sarah. "The council has grown weak. We cannot let them leave." Ethan pulled Sarah behind him. "Yeah, of course. Nothing's ever easy." Varric's expression was unreadable, but his voice carried authority. "Stand down. The trials are complete. The human has won." The rogue warrior sneered. Then he should prove himself in battle. Ethan sighed. "I just did that." The warrior didn't care. He raised his weapon and fired. Ethan barely had time to react before Althera yanked him backward, the blast missing him by inches. The guards leaped into action, clashing with the rogue warriors in a blur of energy and movement. Sarah gripped his hand. "We need to get out of here." Althera nodded. "Come with me." They ran through the chaos, dodging blasts and falling debris. The grand chamber was now a battlefield, with Silari fighting against their own people. Varric remained on his throne, his expression cold, as if he had already foreseen this outcome. Ethan didn't have time to think about that. He had only one goal: get Sarah out of here. They sprinted through the long metallic hallways, the alarm still blaring. Althera led them through hidden passages, avoiding the worst of the fighting. "The docking bay is just ahead," she said. "Once you reach your ship, you can escape." Ethan's mind raced. "And what about you?" Althera gave him a small, sad smile. "My place is here." Sarah squeezed her arm. "Thank you. For everything." Althera nodded. "Go." They burst into the docking bay, a massive chamber filled with sleek alien ships, hovering platforms, and energy fields. Their ship was at the far end, its entrance open. But standing between them and the ship were more rogue warriors. Ethan groaned. "Of course." One of the warriors smirked. "You are not leaving this planet, human." Ethan was out of patience. He charged forward, dodging a blast and tackling the nearest warrior. The alien was strong, but Ethan was fueled by desperation. He slammed his fist into the warrior's face, grabbing the glowing weapon from his belt. Sarah ducked behind a crate, grabbing a fallen Silari blaster. She fired a quick shot, forcing the warriors to take cover. "Ethan, move," she shouted. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Sarah's hand, and they ran toward the ship. More warriors closed in, but just as they reached the ramp, an explosion rocked the docking bay. Ethan turned to see Varric standing at the entrance, his hand raised. The Chancellor had fired the blast himself, his glowing eyes locked on the rogue warriors. "Go," Varric commanded, "before I change my mind." Ethan hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Come on, Sarah." They rushed inside, the doors sealing behind them. Ethan jumped into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls. The ship rumbled to life, and the docking clamps released. Sarah sat beside him, gripping his arm. Punch it. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He pushed the controls forward, and the ship shot into the sky, leaving the chaos behind. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere, Sarah exhaled shakily. We did it. Ethan looked at her, his heart finally slowing. Yeah, we did. But he knew this wasn't over. The Silari wouldn't forget what had happened today. And something told him this was only the beginning of a much bigger fight. The ship soared through the endless darkness of space, its engines humming steadily. Ethan sat in the pilot's seat, his fingers gripping the controls tightly. He kept glancing at the radar, half expecting a fleet of Silari warships to chase them. But nothing came. For now, they were free. Sarah sat beside him, her expression still tense. I can't believe we actually made it. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. Neither can I. He turned to her with a small smile. But I wasn't going to let them keep you. Sarah reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I know. For a moment, they just sat there, breathing, letting the reality of their escape sink in. But Ethan knew their problems weren't over. We need to figure out where we're going, he said, checking the navigation system. We can't go back to Earth. Not yet. Sarah frowned. Why not? Ethan leaned back. Think about it. The Silari aren't just going to forget what happened. Some of them wanted to keep you locked up forever. Others wanted me dead. We embarrassed them in front of their High Council. Sarah nodded slowly. You think they'll come after us? Ethan sighed. I don't know. But I do know one thing. If they consider us a threat, they won't let us go so easily. Sarah bit her lip. So what do we do? Ethan turned toward the control panel, scanning the nearby star systems. We lay low. Find a place to hide, at least for a while. He pulled up a holographic map of the sector. Several planets blinked on the screen, but one caught his eye. A small, uninhabited moon orbiting a gas giant. This might work, he muttered. Sarah leaned closer. What is it? A dead moon. No settlements, no life signs, just rock and caves. We can land there, make some repairs, and figure out our next move. Sarah hesitated. Are you sure it's safe? Ethan chuckled dryly. Nothing's safe anymore. Sarah sighed. All right, let's go. Ethan set the coordinates, and the ship adjusted course. The journey would take a few hours, so he stood up and stretched. Sarah followed him to the back of the ship, where a small living area held supplies, tools, and a cot. She sat down, rubbing her temples. I still can't believe all of this happened, she whispered. Ethan sat across from her. Me neither. He studied her for a moment. Are you okay? Sarah looked at him, her green eyes filled with emotion. I don't know. Everything changed so fast. One moment, I was on Earth with you. The next, I was in a prison on an alien world, fighting for my freedom. She shook her head. I don't know how to feel. Ethan reached out and took her hands. We'll figure this out, together. Sarah smiled, though it was small. You always say that. Ethan smirked. Because it's true. Before she could respond, an alarm beeped from the cockpit. Ethan's heart pounded. Had the Silari found them already? He rushed back to the controls and checked the screen. A single ship was approaching. Fast. Sarah stood behind him. Who is it? Ethan narrowed his eyes at the readings. It's not Silari. The design doesn't match their ships. Sarah frowned. Then who? A voice crackled through the ship's communication system. Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Orlan of the Free Star Union. We know who you are. We need to talk. Ethan exchanged a look with Sarah. Free Star Union. Sarah shook her head. Never heard of them. Ethan hesitated, then activated the communicator. Captain Orlan, this is Ethan Carter. What do you want? A pause. Then Orlan's voice came through again. We want to help. Ethan frowned. Why? Orlan chuckled. Because you just embarrassed the Silari High Council. And trust me, there are a lot of people in the galaxy who'd like to see them taken down. Ethan's jaw tightened. We're not looking for a war. Orlan's voice remained calm. Maybe not, but war might be looking for you. Silence filled the ship. Sarah put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. What do we do? Ethan stared at the screen, his mind racing. If the Free Star Union was real, they might be able to help. They might be able to protect Sarah. But if they got involved in something bigger, there might be no turning back. Ethan took a deep breath and made his decision. He activated the communicator. All right, Captain Orlan, let's talk. The screen blinked, and a new journey began.